The humid air over Palm Jumeirah hung heavy, still carrying the faint perfume of saltwater from the Arabian Gulf. At 3:14 a.m., the calm shattered. A pair of Dubai police patrol cars slid to a stop in front of an ivory-walled villa, their blue and red lights painting the palm-lined street in urgent color. Moments later, an ambulance joined them, followed by an unmarked black SUV that belonged to the Criminal Investigation Department. Neighbors peered from balconies, their silk curtains swaying, phones in hand. Inside the wrought iron gates, the private garden was lit up like a stage under the glare of portable spotlights. At its center, the shimmering blue of an Olympic-length pool, now disturbed by the slow drift of a lifeless body. She was face down, black hair fanned out in the water like ink. The silk nightgown clung to her skin, translucent under the pool lights. A broken champagne flute rested on the edge of the marble decking, the jagged stem catching the light like a warning. Two paramedics waded into the shallow end, their boots splashing as they pulled the young woman to the side. One started chest compressions immediately, the rhythmic push of his palms breaking the night's silence, punctuated by the hiss of oxygen being prepared. But the pale, unresponsive face told the story before the monitors did. A senior officer, Captain Omar Rahman, crouched beside the body. His eyes caught the faint yellowing on her forearms, bruises, not the kind you get from swimming. And there on her hand, a thin gold bracelet, far too expensive for a domestic worker's salary. From the far end of the garden, a figure stood motionless in a silk robe. Layla Al-Mansour, wife of Sheikh Khalid Al-Mansour, didn't move toward the scene. Her hands were clasped loosely in front of her, face composed but pale in the floodlight's glare. When Omar approached, she spoke first, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. "She slipped," Layla said, eyes fixed on the pool. "I heard a splash. By the time I got outside, it was too late." Behind her, the villa's French doors stood open, sheer curtains drifting in the sea breeze. Inside, the marble floors glistened, not from cleaning, but from the faint trail of wet footprints leading from the pool to the master bedroom. On the pool deck, a junior officer leaned down to pick up something half-hidden beneath a lounge chair. A Samsung phone, its screen spiderwebbed with cracks, still glowing with a half-typed message. "We need to talk before she finds out." The timestamp read 1:47 a.m. And though no names were on the screen, Omar already suspected exactly who she was and exactly what this case would become. Before her name made headlines in Dubai, Maria Clara Santos was just another face in a Cebu City neighborhood where hard work was currency, and hope was the only luxury most people could afford. She was 26, the second of 4 children, and the quiet one in a family that rarely stopped talking. Her father was a tricycle driver whose daily earnings depended on weather and luck. Her mother sold homemade kakinin from a roadside cart, waking before dawn to grind rice flour by hand. Maria's escape plan was education. She studied nursing at Cebu Normal University, graduating with good marks but no job offers. Hospitals were already overflowing with applicants. Even the private clinics wanted experience she didn't have. When a recruitment agency in Manila advertised domestic work in Dubai with a salary 5 times what she could earn at home, she hesitated only long enough to kiss her younger siblings goodbye. 2 years, she told them. 2 years of sacrifice, and she'd come home with enough savings to open a small clinic. In Dubai, Maria was placed through an agency that catered to the city's wealthiest families, people who lived in palatial villas with marble foyers, gold leaf ceilings, and more cars than parking spaces. Her first post was with a Lebanese business family in Jumeirah, but after just 6 months, her employer relocated abroad. The agency moved her to a new household, the private residence of Sheikh Khalid Al-Mansour and his wife, Layla. Sheikh Khalid was 44, but carried himself like a man who had never heard the word no. His family's fortune came from hotel chains and luxury resorts. His personal fortune came from knowing exactly which hands to shake and which deals to make in private. In public, he was the picture of Emirati dignity, crisp candor, quiet confidence, charitable donations announced with modest humility. His Instagram account was a curated gallery of Arabian horses, desert sunsets, and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. But those who worked close to him whispered about the other side. Late-night hotel suites, discreet companions, and an appetite for women who came from far outside his social circle, women who had everything to gain and nothing to bargain with. Layla Al-Mansour was the daughter of a prominent merchant family, educated in London, fluent in French and English. She had been married to Khalid for 20 years, and in that time she had learned to treat marriage less like a love story and more like a high-stakes business partnership. Her public role was as the perfect hostess and tireless philanthropist. But behind the polished smiles, Layla understood the rules of her world. Preserve the family's honor at all costs, keep private matters private, and never let scandal find its way past the villa gates. The Al-Mansour villa on Palm Jumeirah was a fortress disguised as a palace. On paper, Maria's duties were simple: manage the couple's private quarters, handle laundry, keep the rooms immaculate. In reality, it meant moving quietly through spaces where whispered phone calls and unfinished glasses of wine hinted at lives far more complicated than her own. At first, she kept her distance. Khalid rarely acknowledged her beyond polite greetings. Layla was cordial but distant. The other staff, a driver, a gardener, and another maid, worked in their own orbits. But over time, the invisible lines began to blur. It started with Khalid's small courtesies, offering her imported dates during Ramadan, asking about her family back home, joking that she made better coffee than the staff at his hotel. She noticed the way his eyes lingered, not in the passing way of a busy employer, but in the measured way of a man taking stock. For Maria, the Sheikh's attention was dangerous territory, but it was also intoxicating, the sense of being seen in a world where most people barely noticed she existed. And somewhere between the silences, the glances, and the errands where he insisted on driving her himself, a line was crossed. It started with the earrings. Layla found them one morning on the vanity in her private dressing room, delicate gold hoops she did not own, resting beside her collection of Cartier and Van Cleef. At first, she assumed they belonged to one of her friends who had stayed late after a dinner party. But when she asked her regular circle, no one claimed them. That was the first thread. The second came a week later. Layla had been upstairs reviewing guest lists for an upcoming charity gala when she heard laughter from the terrace below. Not just laughter, his laughter. Khalid rarely laughed like that with her anymore. She moved to the balcony and looked down. There in the shade of a white parasol was Maria arranging a tray of fresh fruit. Khalid stood close, too close, his head inclined toward hers. Whatever he said made her blush, and she lowered her gaze, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. It could have been nothing, but to a wife who had learned to read every shift in her husband's posture, it was something. That evening, Layla dismissed the other staff early. When Maria brought her mint tea to the library, Layla spoke without looking up from her book. "You've settled in well here." Maria hesitated. "Yes, madam, thank you." "And my husband?" Layla's tone was light, almost conversational. "Has he been kind to you?" Maria blinked. "Yes, madam, very kind." "Good." Layla set the book aside, meeting her eyes for the first time. "Because kindness is a delicate thing, easily misread, easily abused." Maria swallowed hard, unsure if this was a warning or a test. She murmured a soft, "Yes, madam," and backed out of the room. A few days later, Layla's driver overheard something in the courtyard. Khalid was on the phone, speaking in a tone the driver had never heard, soft, coaxing, almost pleading. "Habibti, you don't have to worry, I'll take care of everything. Just trust me." The driver saw Maria emerge from the kitchen moments later, avoiding eye contact, her phone clutched tight. When he quietly relayed the exchange to Layla, she said nothing. But that night, she called her cousin, a woman known in their circles for handling delicate matters without involving the police. From that point on, Maria noticed subtle changes. The other maid no longer spoke to her during breaks. The driver's friendly banter vanished. Layla's smiles were polite but sharp-edged. And then came the incident in the market. Maria had been sent to pick up fresh saffron from the spice souk. When she returned, she found her room had been searched, her drawers slightly misaligned, her laundry bin disturbed. At the bottom of her wardrobe, she found her own phone, powered off. She was certain she'd left it charging on the bedside table. When she turned it on, there was a single new message waiting from an unknown number. "Be careful, she knows." The villa was unusually quiet that Friday evening. Most of the staff had been dismissed for the weekend. Only Maria remained, tasked with overseeing a late delivery of floral arrangements for the grand staircase. Khalid was due back from a business trip in Abu Dhabi. Layla, according to the household calendar, had a charity event at the Four Seasons. At 8:17 p.m., the front gates opened. Maria expected the florist's van. Instead, it was Khalid's black Bentley. He stepped out, still in his tailored suit, the scent of expensive cologne clinging to him like a second skin. "You're still here," he said, sounding almost pleased. Maria smiled awkwardly. "Just waiting for the delivery, sir." "No need," he said, glancing around the empty foyer. "Come, I've brought something for you." From his jacket pocket, he produced a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate diamond pendant, far beyond anything she could have imagined owning. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's yours. You deserve beautiful things." For a moment, she allowed herself to believe him that this was about affection, not power. But then, the front doors opened again. Layla stepped into the foyer, the hem of her silk abaya brushing the marble. Her eyes swept the scene, Maria holding the open box, Khalid standing close, the charged silence between them. The door clicked shut behind her. "So," Layla said, her voice calm, "this is why my husband comes home early." Maria's hands trembled as she snapped the box closed and tried to hand it back. "Madam, Enough." Layla's gaze was fixed on Khalid now. "Do you bring your shame into my home so openly?" Khalid's jaw tightened. "Layla." "Save it," she cut in, turning back to Maria. "Pack your things tonight." Maria did as she was told, retreating to her small room off the kitchen. But minutes later, Khalid appeared in the doorway. "She's angry now," he said quietly. "But she'll calm down, just stay out of sight. I'll arrange a new place for you." Tears welled in Maria's eyes. "It's not just about me anymore." Khalid frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated only a moment before whispering, "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was not relief, not joy, it was calculation. Khalid's voice was low, urgent. "No one can know, especially her. I'll take care of it, you understand." Maria shook her head. "I'm keeping the baby." It was the first time she had ever told him no. The next morning, Layla invited Maria to clear the air in the garden, insisting the conversation be private. The driver was sent on an errand. The gardener was given the day off. Later that night, neighbors would tell police they heard raised voices from the pool area. A splash, then silence. By the time the household CCTV footage was reviewed, one of the pool cameras had been mysteriously disabled. The remaining angles showed only the ripple of water and the faint reflection of a woman's silk robe at the edge of the frame. The official story, as told to police in the hours after, was that Maria drowned in an accident. The unofficial truth was far more deliberate. At 10:42 a.m., Maria followed Layla out to the rear garden. The pool shimmered in the desert sun, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine from the hedges. Layla walked slowly, her silk robe trailing behind her, every step measured. "You've caused quite a storm in my house," Layla said without turning. Maria's voice was soft. "I never meant to." "You meant exactly what you did," Layla cut in, finally facing her. "You thought you could keep him, that he would choose you. But you don't understand men like my husband. They don't choose, they take. Maria's hands trembled. It's not about him anymore. I'm carrying his. I know, Layla interrupted, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. And that's exactly why this ends now. The argument grew sharper. Maria stepped back, her heel catching the wet edge of the pool. Layla moved forward, closing the distance in 2 quick steps. Witnesses would later recall hearing a short, sharp scream. One neighbor, walking her dog along the property wall, thought it was a child playing. In the absence of direct footage, investigators pieced together the scene from physical evidence. A broken fingernail lodged in the silk fibers of Layla's sleeve, faint bruising along Maria's forearms consistent with being grabbed. And then the splash. Maria could swim, but the long robe she wore tangled around her legs like a net. She broke the surface twice, gasping, calling out in a mix of English and Tagalog. Layla stood at the edge, unmoving. When Maria's movements slowed, Layla stepped closer, and with the tip of her foot pushed her fully under. The pool skimmer, found later on the deck, bore fresh scratches along its handle, the desperate marks of someone reaching for anything that could keep them afloat. At 10:58 a.m., Layla called for the driver, her voice calm. Maria has had an accident. Call an ambulance. By the time paramedics arrived, Maria's body was already laid out on the stone deck, her skin pale, water streaming from her hair. The Sheikh was nowhere on the property. The attending medic noted that CPR had not been attempted. In his report, he underlined one detail twice. Patient's airway contained no pool water, only traces of vomit and gastric fluid, which meant she may not have drowned at all. The call reached Khalid at 11:12 a.m., just as he was stepping out of a board meeting at the Emirates Towers. His driver recalled the Sheikh going pale, then abruptly leaving without explanation. By the time he arrived at the villa, the police had already cordoned off the pool area. Paramedics were wheeling Maria's covered body toward the ambulance, the white sheet clinging to her form in the midday heat. Khalid pushed past an officer. What happened? Captain Omar Rahman met him at the garden gate. Your employee suffered an accident, Sheikh Khalid. We are gathering details. From the terrace above, Layla stood watching. She didn't come down. In the grand salon, Layla gave her version to the investigators. I invited Maria for tea by the pool. We spoke about her future. She seemed distracted. Then she slipped. I ran to call for help. Her tone was even, her eyes steady. She emphasized her own efforts, the call to the driver, the rush for an ambulance. She never mentioned the argument. When asked why she hadn't attempted CPR, she gave a faint smile. I was in shock, and I don't know how. Khalid, separated from the questioning, was visibly shaken, but his responses to police were careful. Yes, Maria worked here. She was a good employee. I was fond of her. But I don't know what could have happened. When asked about any personal relationship, his eyes hardened. She was staff, that is all. The officers noted the abruptness, the way his voice clipped on the word staff. While the official interviews took place, the remaining villa staff huddled in the service quarters. One maid whispered that she'd seen Maria crying the night before. Another claimed Maria had hinted she was in trouble, but wouldn't say with whom. The driver kept silent, remembering the unknown text Maria had received days earlier. Be careful, she knows. That afternoon, Captain Omar received the preliminary medical report from the paramedic team. The cause of death was listed as asphyxiation due to possible airway obstruction, with no significant water in the lungs, a detail that clashed with Layla's drowning narrative. By evening, Omar ordered the villa's CCTV hard drives to be collected. But by the time technicians accessed them, one camera's feed, the one aimed directly at the pool, had been wiped clean. Captain Omar knew from experience that accidents left chaos in their wake. Misplaced items, panicked witnesses, inconsistencies born from shock. But this scene was too tidy. The autopsy was conducted at the Zaid Military Hospital morgue. Forensic pathologist Dr. Hadi Khalaf noted bruising patterns on Maria's arms and upper chest, symmetrical marks consistent with being held or pushed. "There's petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes," Dr. Khalaf told Omar in a private briefing. "Classic sign of asphyxiation, not drowning. The lungs are nearly clear." Omar frowned. "So she was suffocated." The doctor nodded slowly. "Or held under long enough to block breathing, but not long enough for water to fill the lungs." When the digital forensics team analyzed the villa's CCTV drives, they found a gap of exactly 27 minutes in the pool camera's recording. Between 10:41 a.m. and 11:08 a.m., the rest of the property's feeds remained untouched. "That's no power glitch," the technician explained. "That's someone targeting one camera and erasing only the time of the incident." When asked who had access to the security system, the household manager hesitated. "Only Madam Layla and Sheikh Khalid." Omar called in the driver for questioning. At first, he recited the same careful version of events he'd given earlier. But when Omar showed him the autopsy summary, the man shifted in his seat. I saw her, Captain. A week before she died, she was crying in her room. Said Madam was watching her, said she might have to leave." "Did she say why?" The driver hesitated. "She was pregnant." Omar's pen paused over his notebook, and the father. The driver looked away. "She didn't have to say." Maria's belongings were returned to the Philippine consulate for repatriation. But tucked in the lining of her handbag, a consulate staffer found a small second phone, one not listed in the villa's records. On it were dozens of WhatsApp voice notes between Maria and a friend back home. In them, Maria spoke in Tagalog, but one repeated phrase was clear even to non-speakers. "She knows. She wants me gone." In her final message, recorded 2 nights before her death, Maria's voice was barely above a whisper. "If anything happens to me, it's not an accident." The deeper Captain Omar went, the more he realized Maria's death was not an isolated tragedy. It was a thread in a much larger, darker tapestry. Through informal conversations with colleagues in Abu Dhabi and Sharjah, Omar learned of 4 other cases over the past decade involving foreign domestic workers. All young women, all employed in wealthy households, all dead under accidental or natural circumstances. In each case, the victim had been in the household less than 2 years. Rumors or private testimonies hinted at affairs with male employers. No charges were filed. Deaths were either classified as misadventure or medical complication. One name surfaced more than once: Layla Al-Mansouri. While no direct links were proven, she had been present during 2 of those incidents, as a relative or close family friend. Maria's case drew the attention of the Philippine embassy. Vice Consul Rivera formally requested a review of the investigation, citing credible indications of foul play. But Omar hit a wall. Khalid's family wielded both money and influence. Certain files were suddenly unavailable. Witnesses who had been cooperative became evasive. When Omar pushed for a formal inquest, a senior superior pulled him aside. "Be careful," the man warned. "There are lines you don't cross in this city. You want to keep your badge. Close the file quietly." 3 weeks after Maria's death, an unmarked envelope arrived at Omar's office. Inside, a single USB drive. No note, no sender information. The drive contained a video file, grainy but damning. It was CCTV footage from the villa's pool camera, the exact missing 27 minutes. In it, the confrontation between Layla and Maria was partially visible in reflection on the pool's surface and in the glass door behind them. The shove, the splash, Layla's unmoving silhouette as Maria struggled. It wasn't crystal clear enough for a courtroom, beyond reasonable doubt, but it was more than enough to confirm Omar's suspicions. Omar arranged a quiet meeting with Khalid in a private majlis away from the city. When shown the footage, Khalid's face drained of color. "I told her to keep the baby," he murmured. "But Layla, she thought it would destroy us." "Then help me bring her in," Omar urged. Khalid shook his head. "You don't understand. If I speak, it's not just my marriage that ends. My family's empire, my life." The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioner, the sound of power deciding to protect itself. Captain Omar knew he couldn't rely on Khalid. But he also knew Maria's case could not vanish like the others. The evidence, the autopsy, the bruising patterns, the recovered CCTV clip was enough for suspicion, but the prosecutor's office hesitated. Layla was summoned for questioning under the vague pretext of clarifying statements. She arrived flanked by two high-profile attorneys, her silk abaya flowing, face impassive. When confronted with the bruising evidence, she smiled faintly. "She was drowning. I tried to pull her out. Bruises happen in panic." When shown the CCTV reflection footage, her lawyer leaned forward. "This is inadmissible, poor quality, no definitive proof." The interview lasted just 42 minutes. She walked out without charges. The Philippine embassy continued to push. Vice Consul Rivera gave multiple interviews to overseas press, framing Maria's death as part of a pattern of systemic abuse. Within weeks, the story caught international media attention. Hashtags began circulating. Activists protested outside UAE embassies abroad. The UAE's Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued a short statement. "An investigation is ongoing. The UAE is committed to the fair and just treatment of all residents." Privately, Omar was told to close the matter in the interest of diplomatic harmony. Maria's family in Davao received a quiet offer. AED 600,000 in condolence payments. A promise to cover the education of Maria's younger sister. A non-disclosure agreement forbidding them from speaking to the press. The family accepted. In their rural barangay, the amount was life-changing, but it was not justice. Unable to press charges, Omar did what he could. He quietly leaked the USB footage to an overseas human rights group. Within months, it appeared in a documentary investigating abuse of domestic workers in the Gulf. The documentary never named Khalid or Layla directly, but those who knew the circles recognized them instantly. In public, Layla's social appearances became rarer. Whispers followed her into every majlis. She was never charged, but she was never entirely free again. Here's Chapter 10, Aftermath and Reflection, bringing the true crime arc to an emotionally resonant close. Maria's body was flown home on a humid Thursday morning. The coffin was sealed, wrapped in the flag of the Philippines. At the small provincial airport in Davao, her mother collapsed against it, wailing her daughter's name. The wake was held in the family's modest home, the same place Maria had left 2 years earlier with dreams of saving enough to build a concrete house and send her sister to college. Neighbors came in waves, some bringing rice, others flowers. Her mother clutched a framed photo, Maria in her crisp white maid's uniform, smiling shyly for the camera. "She called me every Sunday," her mother said softly to the local priest. "She said she was happy. She lied so I wouldn't worry." Back in the UAE, life in the Al Mansouri villa resumed outwardly. The pool was drained for maintenance and never refilled. Khalid traveled more, often alone. Layla remained in the house, but her public charm had dulled. She avoided society weddings, knowing the whispers would follow. The staff changed over the next year, none staying more than a few months. In his office drawer, Captain Omar kept a plain folder labeled Maria Santos, closed. Inside were copies of the autopsy, the phone transcripts, and a still frame from the deleted CCTV video showing Layla's figure on the pool deck. He told himself he kept it in case new evidence ever surfaced. But he also knew it was there as a reminder, Some cases never get justice in court, only in memory. Maria's name appeared in 2 international reports on domestic worker exploitation. Her story was told alongside others, Sri Lankan, Kenyan, Ethiopian, Indonesian women, all of whom had died far from home. The documentary with the leaked footage continued to circulate online, banned in the UAE, but shared quietly among expat communities. Maria Santos was 27 years old. She left home to provide for her family. She died in the home of the people she served. Her story is not unique. Until the silence breaks, it will happen again.